Listener. Tonight, we travel far back in time to a world of quiet fields and loud rules, to the lives of those who worked and prayed and feared the passing of each day. This story is about a farmer and his family who lived under the weight of unseen hands. The sun rose slow and heavy over the valley. It was not the golden sun of freedom, but a pale and watchful eye that saw everything. Daniel woke before its light touched the earth. He sat by the small window where the glass was cracked and the morning wind whispered through the gaps. He rubbed his hands together. The roughness of his palms told the story of years gone by. Every line in his skin was a record of toil and obedience. His wife Anna still slept, curled beneath the old wool blanket that had more patches than cloth. Their little daughter May was beside her, her breath soft and steady, like a song Daniel could not afford to forget. The rooster crowed, and Daniel whispered a prayer, not to God above, but to the earth below, because it was the earth that fed him and punished him, the earth that could turn from gentle to cruel overnight. Outside, the fields waited. They were not his fields. They belonged to Lord Heron, whose castle stood upon the hill like a dark crown. Every blade of wheat Daniel planted was counted. Every basket of grain was divided. A share for the Lord, a share for the church, and what was left barely filled their wooden bowls. The rules were written on parchment, but Daniel could not read. He only knew the rules by the sound of the church bell. When it rang at dawn, he worked. When it rang at dusk, he stopped. When it rang at midnight, he prayed. And if it rang at the wrong time, someone would vanish by morning. He walked down the narrow path where the mud clung to his boots. The air smelled of smoke and damp straw. In the distance, the bell tower stood tall, its shadow long and sharp across the land. Daniel could hear the faint clang of metal as the guards changed. Even that sound made him uneasy, because every noise in this village meant power, and power never belonged to men like him. At the field, the other farmers were already at work. Each face looked the same: hollow eyes, thin cheeks, backs bent as if the soil itself demanded tribute from their bones. Daniel joined them without a word. The silence of poor men was louder than any sermon, dear listener. By midday, the sun burned bright, but gave no comfort. The men paused for bread that was hard as stone and water that tasted of iron. Someone muttered about the new tax. Another cursed under his breath, but none dared speak loud, because words could bring punishment faster than hunger ever could. Daniel looked up toward the hill. He saw the riders passing along the path to the castle, bright armor shining in the light. They were young and proud, sons of those who never worked a field in their lives. Daniel wondered how it felt to live without fear, to eat without counting bites, to sleep without praying the roof would not leak in the rain. When he came home that evening, Anna was kneeling by the door, her face pale, her hands trembling. May sat quietly in the corner, holding the broken doll Daniel had carved for her years ago. Anna whispered, "They came today, the collectors. They said our share is short again. They took the goat." Daniel froze. The goat was their milk, their cheese, their one small wealth in a world that measured life by possessions. He sat beside Anna, unable to speak. The weight of silence crushed him more than any word. Night came with wind and hunger. Daniel looked at May as she tried to fall asleep without supper. Her small body curled tight, as if she could hide from the cold. He wanted to tell her stories of better times, but even lies required hope, and he was not sure he had any left. The bell rang in the distance, slow and hollow. Daniel closed his eyes. It was not a sound of comfort. It was a reminder. The laws watched even in darkness. In the days that followed, things grew worse. Rain flooded the fields, the crops rotted, and Lord Heron's men blamed the farmers. They said laziness had angered the heavens. They demanded more grain, but there was none to give. One morning, a man from the next village was tied to the post near the well. His crime? He kept a handful of grain for his starving child. They left his body hanging as warning. The villagers passed with heads bowed. No one dared look too long. But Daniel looked, because he knew that man. He had worked beside him. He had laughed once, long ago when laughter was still possible. That night, Anna spoke softly. "Daniel, we cannot stay. If we do, they will take May next. They take children to work in the manor kitchens, and once they go, they never come back." Daniel sat in silence. The idea of leaving was a sin. To abandon the land meant abandoning duty. But what was duty to a man whose belly was empty, whose wife feared every knock at the door? He thought of the forest beyond the river, a place forbidden by the laws, a place said to be haunted. But Daniel had seen worse ghosts in daylight. Perhaps freedom lived there, among the trees. At dawn, he took a small sack, some bread, and a piece of cloth wrapped around May's doll. They left their cottage quietly. The village was still, only smoke rising from chimneys and the echo of distant bells. Each step toward the forest felt like a heartbeat of rebellion. Anna held May close. Daniel looked back once. The old house stood small against the fading sky. He wondered if it would remember them, or if the next poor soul would sleep beneath the same leaking roof. The path to the river was long and cold. Their feet sank in mud. The wind carried the smell of wet leaves and decay. May began to cry softly. Anna whispered comfort, but her voice shook. When they reached the river, they found the bridge broken. The wood had rotted away. Only stones and dark water remained. Daniel waded in. The cold bit his skin. He lifted May upon his shoulder. Anna followed. The water rose to their waists, then to their chests, but they kept moving because behind them lay the sound of the bell and before them the unknown silence of freedom. They crossed, soaked, shivering, but alive. The forest waited like a dark sea, tall trees whispering secrets to one another. Daniel took Anna's hand. "We are not slaves here," he said quietly. For the first time, the words felt true. But freedom has its own hunger, and the forest was not kind. The forest had no bells, no lords, no rules, only the sound of wind moving through branches like a whisper that never stopped. For Daniel, it was strange to breathe without the weight of command. He felt both peace and fear, as if silence itself could punish him. They built a small shelter of branches and leaves. It was not a home, but it was enough to keep the rain away. At night they gathered around a fire. The flames danced like living spirits, and the smoke rose into the dark sky where stars blinked like forgotten prayers. May slept between them, her small hands clutching the old wooden doll. Anna brushed the girl's hair gently. She smiled, though her eyes were tired. Daniel watched them and felt a warmth that was not from the fire. He had lost everything, yet somehow this moment felt sacred. The next morning he searched for food. The forest was deep and wild. He found berries and roots, but hunger made even bitter things taste like blessing. He saw footprints near the stream, human prints, and fear gripped him. Maybe other people had fled here too, or maybe the Lord's men had crossed the river searching. He returned quickly. Anna waited by the fire. She looked at him with silent worry. He shook his head. "We must move deeper," he said. She nodded without a word. Days passed. The forest became their new world. They learned to listen to its sounds. The The cry of owls, the rustle of animals, the sigh of trees when the wind turned cold. May began to laugh again sometimes. She chased butterflies among the ferns. Her laughter was like sunlight breaking through clouds. But each joy carried a shadow. Food grew scarce, the nights colder. Anna's cough grew worse. She tried to hide it, but Daniel heard it when the world was quiet. He knew sickness here could mean death. There were no healers, no priests, no help. One evening, while searching for dry wood, Daniel found something strange. Half hidden beneath the roots of an old oak stood the ruins of a small stone chapel. Its walls broken, its door gone. Inside lay fragments of carved angels worn smooth by time.
Dear listener, a faint light slipped through the cracks. He stepped closer, and for a moment he felt the air grow still, as if the forest itself was listening. He whispered, "We have come here with nothing. We ask only to be left in peace." His voice echoed in the hollow space, and for reasons he could not explain, he felt lighter when he left. He gathered a piece of stone from the old floor and carried it back, a token of something ancient and kind. That night, the wind howled. Anna shivered under the blanket. Daniel held her hand. Her skin was cold. He whispered, "Hold on. Tomorrow will be warmer." But the forest had its own will, and mercy was not part of it. By morning, her cough was deeper, her face pale. Daniel searched the woods desperately. He boiled herbs, brought water from the stream, but nothing helped. Anna smiled weakly, her lips dry and cracked. "Daniel," she said softly, "promise me you will keep her safe." He could not answer. He only nodded. The world had taken much from him, but this. That night, Anna grew quiet. Her breathing slowed. May slept unaware beside her, and before dawn came, Anna was gone. Daniel sat still for a long time. He did not cry because tears needed strength, and he had none left. The fire burned low. The forest was silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. When May woke, she touched her mother's face and whispered, "Mama, why are you cold?" Daniel gathered stones and built a small mound near the stream. He placed the piece of stone from the old chapel upon it and whispered, "She was light, and the world could not keep it." For days he wandered the woods without purpose. May followed quietly. Sometimes she asked questions. Sometimes she simply held his hand. He no longer knew if they were living or only surviving. Then one morning, as the mist lifted from the trees, they heard voices, soft at first, then clearer. Daniel froze. He pulled May close. They hid behind the brush and waited. A group of people appeared along the path. Men and women, thin and tired like them. They carried baskets, tools, some children on their backs. One of them saw Daniel and called out, "Do not fear, we are not soldiers." They were wanderers, farmers who had also fled the lords and taxes. They lived in hidden clearings deeper in the forest. Daniel followed them cautiously, and for the first time in many months, he saw firelight that was not his own. They welcomed him, shared food, told stories of the villages they had left behind. They spoke of freedom, of building something new, a place where no bell ruled over men. Daniel listened, and something began to stir inside him. Hope, a small, fragile flame, but alive. He helped them clear land, plant seeds, build huts. The days became full again, hard but meaningful. Each evening they sat together, sharing bread, listening to the sounds of the forest. The children played near the fires, and May laughed again. One night, an old man among them spoke. "They will find us one day. The lords will not forget." Daniel looked at him and said, "Then we will run again. But until that day, we live." Months passed. The seasons turned. The fields grew green once more. The small community began to thrive. They called their place New Haven, because it was built by those who had nothing left but hope. Daniel worked from dawn to dusk. Each time he saw May smiling, he felt Anna's spirit watching, as if the wind itself carried her voice. But peace is a fragile thing. It cannot live long in a world ruled by fear. One afternoon, the sky darkened. Riders came from the north, armored men, their banners marked with the black crest of Lord Heron. The bell of tyranny had crossed the river at last. Panic swept through the camp. Women gathered the children. Men grabbed tools and makeshift weapons. Daniel's heart pounded. He remembered the noose on the post, the goat taken, the silence of the village. The riders shouted orders, demanded submission. No one moved. The old man stepped forward. "This land is free," he said. "Go back to your lord." The captain laughed. "Free? There is no such word for peasants." They struck him down. The sound of steel against flesh broke the silence. Then chaos, screams, fire, smoke. Daniel grabbed May, and they ran into the woods once more. Behind them, flames rose into the dark sky. The dream of New Haven burned like dry straw. But Daniel did not look back. He had learned that to survive, one must keep walking. They hid until nightfall, then deeper into the forest again, until the sound of pursuit faded into distance. May cried softly, "Father, where will we go now?" Daniel looked at the stars through the branches and said, "Anywhere the bell cannot reach." The smoke of New Haven still hung in the sky when the dawn came. Daniel and May sat by a cold stream, their faces covered in ash, their eyes empty like broken glass. They had run through the night without rest, and now the forest around them felt endless, quiet, and cruel. May shivered and held her father's arm. Her small voice trembled. "Are we the only ones left?" Daniel looked toward the rising light. He did not answer because words meant little when the world itself had turned to dust. They walked for many days, following the stream until it widened into a shallow river. The water was muddy, but it was life. Daniel caught fish with his hands. May ate them quietly. Sometimes they found wild apples, sometimes nothing but grass. The forest that had once felt like a refuge now felt like a cage. They passed through the ruins of old farms, blackened walls, broken carts, fields turned to weeds. The land was empty of laughter. Only crows and silence remained. Daniel could not tell if war or hunger or the plague had taken these people, but he saw bones among the fallen houses, and he knew death had lived here. One evening they reached a small road, half buried in mud, and followed it towards a valley. There they saw a village still standing. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the sound of a distant bell reached them. Daniel froze. That sound again, the bell that ruled men. He wanted to turn away, but May was weak and pale. Her feet were bleeding. They needed shelter. Where he had come from, what sins he carried, what he had lost. Daniel told him little. The priest nodded and said, "Work hard, pray more, and the Lord may forgive the world." That night, Daniel and May slept on the floor beside other strangers. Some coughed in their sleep. Others muttered prayers. The air was thick with fear. Outside, the bell rang again, slow and heavy, marking not time, but control. Days passed. Daniel worked in the fields. He dug the earth, cut wood, fixed fences. He did whatever was asked. In return, they were given bread, thin and dry, but enough to keep May alive. He began to notice how the village lived under the shadow of that bell. When it rang, everyone stopped to kneel, to bow, to obey. No one questioned it, because the bell was said to protect them from the plague, from evil, from hunger. But Daniel saw how fear ruled stronger than any lord ever had. One morning he watched a man being dragged to the square. The priest shouted that he had stolen a chicken. The villagers watched, silent, afraid. The man begged, but mercy was not part of the rule here. They tied him to a post, and the bell rang again. Daniel held May close so she would not see, but the sound of the lash still filled the air. That night May asked, "Why do they hurt each other?" Daniel whispered, "Because they are afraid. When people fear death, they will do anything to feel safe." Weeks passed. Then came the sickness. It moved like a shadow through the houses. Men fell, women coughed blood, children burned with fever. The priest said it was God's trial. He ordered everyone to pray harder, to confess, to beat their chests, to beg forgiveness. But still the graves grew. Daniel feared for May. He kept her apart from others. He built a small shelter outside the village near the river. Each day he watched smoke rise from the new graves. Each night he prayed not to the priest's God, but to the quiet voice that lived within the wind and trees. One evening May said softly, "Father, why does God take the good ones?" Daniel looked at her and said, "Maybe he needs light where it is dark." But inside he felt only emptiness. Then one morning a rider came to the village, his cloak dark, his horse foaming. He brought orders from the city. No one was to leave. The plague had spread. Anyone found fleeing would be punished by death. Fear turned to madness. People locked their doors. Mothers hid their children. The bell rang every hour, as if sound alone could stop death. But Daniel knew no bell could silence the grave. That night the priest came to the river. He found Daniel and May. He said, "The Lord's house is the only safe place. Come pray before it is too late." Daniel refused. He said, "Your house is filled with the dying, and I have already lost too much." The priest stared at him, his eyes full of pride and fear. Then he left, muttering curses into the wind. By the next day, the village was empty of sound, the air heavy with smoke. The few who still walked moved like ghosts. Daniel gathered what little food he had and lifted May into his arms. She was burning with fever. He walked through the fields, past the silent church, past the dead bell, into the forest once again. He prayed to any power that still listened. Please, not her too. He stopped beside an old chapel ruin, the same he had once found with Anna. He laid May on the stones, her breath shallow, her eyes closed. He remembered Anna's words, "Promise me you will keep her safe." He whispered, "I have tried." He stayed with her through the night, talking softly, telling stories about light, about home, about how the stars were candles of souls watching above. As dawn broke, he felt her small hand grow still. The forest was silent. No birds, no wind, only his heartbeat. He did not cry. Tears belonged to the living. He buried her beside the old chapel ruin, placed wildflowers on the mound, and whispered, "Sleep, my little one. The world was never kind enough for you." Then he sat beside the grave and waited for the wind to carry what was left of him.
Forest grew around the grave like a guardian, its branches bent low, its roots reaching deep. Daniel sat beside the small mound for many days. He did not speak, he did not eat, he only listened to the sound of wind through leaves. And in that sound he began to hear whispers, soft and distant, as if the earth itself remembered every name it had taken. When hunger finally forced him to move, he walked away from the chapel, his steps slow, his heart silent. He followed the river south, where the land opened wide and the hills rolled like waves frozen in stone. He no longer feared the world, because the world had already taken everything from him. For months, he wandered from place to place, villages half empty, fields untended, roads broken by war and plague. Everywhere he went, he saw the same faces, tired, haunted, but still alive. He helped where he could, cut wood for old men, brought water for widows, buried the dead when there was no one left to do it. Sometimes the people gave him bread, sometimes nothing. But he never asked. He had no desire, no ambition, no anger, only a quiet wish that his pain might somehow ease the pain of others. One evening he reached a great plain where a ruined monastery stood, its towers broken, its doors open to the wind. Inside, the halls were empty. Only echoes remained. Daniel made a small fire there and slept among the stones. When morning came, a group of wanderers entered, men and women, children with hollow eyes. They looked at him with fear, but he smiled, and they saw kindness in his face. They told him they had lost their homes to war, and now wandered seeking food and rest. Daniel shared what little he had, and for the first time in years, he felt a faint warmth in his chest. He stayed with them. The group grew into a small community. They repaired the walls, planted gardens among the ruins, raised simple shelters. They called it Haven Rest. Not New Haven, for nothing in life stays new, but rest was enough. Each evening they sat together around the fire. Daniel would tell stories to the children, not of lords or bells, but of stars, of rivers, of kindness that survived even in hunger. He spoke softly, his voice like the wind through wheat,
and the children listened wide-eyed, because his sadness made his stories real. Seasons passed. The world began to heal in small ways. The plague faded, new crops grew, traders returned to the roads. That Daniel did not leave. He became an old man among the ruins, his hair white, his hands scarred, yet his heart calm. He often walked to the hill above the plain, where he could see the valley glowing under the sun. There he would sit and remember Anna's smile, May's laughter, the fire of New Haven, the silent graves. He no longer saw them as pain, but as threads in the cloth of his life. Every loss, every tear, had shaped him into something quiet and strong. One day, a traveler came from the city. He brought news that the great lords had fallen, that the bells of many towns had gone silent, that new voices spoke of freedom, of peace. Daniel listened, and for the first time, he smiled. He walked to the old chapel at the edge of Haven Rest, where ivy covered the stones and wildflowers grew between the cracks. He knelt and whispered, "The bell has stopped. The world has learned, and your sleep can be gentle now." He sat there till the light changed. The sky turned gold, then violet, then dark. Stars appeared one by one. He looked at them and felt as if Anna and May were among them, watching, waiting, but no longer sad. As night deepened, he felt a soft wind touch his face, and he closed his eyes. The forest sang a low song, the same song that had carried him all his life, of sorrow and endurance and love that never ends. When the people of Haven Rest found him in the morning, he was sitting peacefully, his face calm, his hands folded over his chest as if asleep. They buried him beside the old chapel, under the same trees where he had once buried his family, and they placed a stone above his grave. On it, they carved only 3 words: "He kept faith." Years passed. Generations came and went. The monastery crumbled, and the fields turned wild again. But sometimes, when the wind passed over the hills, people said they could still hear a faint sound, not of a bell, but of a voice, soft and kind, telling stories to the night. A voice that spoke not of lords, nor of death, but of the small beauty that survives even in sorrow. And the forest listened, as it always had, keeping the memory of a man who once believed that love was stronger than fear. The sea lay behind them like a memory, and before them stretched a land of frost and silence. Daniel and May walked until their legs trembled, their shoes torn, their hands cracked by the wind. For days they saw no soul, only rocks and the gray backs of distant hills. But in that emptiness, they found something close to peace. They followed the flight of seabirds until they reached a narrow valley where a river cut through the stone and the air smelled faintly of salt and grass. It was here that Daniel stopped. "This will be our place," he said softly, not in words, but in the way he looked at the land. May understood, for both of them were too tired to keep searching. The ground was hard, the soil thin, and yet Daniel began to work. He gathered stones for walls and cut strips of turf from the earth, stacking them like bricks. The walls grew slow and uneven, but strong. Each night May sat near the fire they made from driftwood, her hands raw from scraping moss for bedding, and as the smoke rose between them, they began to feel the faint warmth of home. The first nights were long and cruel. The wind screamed through the valley, and the cold reached into their bones. May shivered beneath the animal skins, and Daniel held her close. His heartbeat was slow and steady, a promise that he would not let the world take her, not yet. They had escaped fire, but now they faced ice. Weeks turned into months, and the little shelter became a house, small and dim, but safe. Daniel learned to set traps near the frozen river, and once caught a seal that had wandered inland. They ate its meat sparingly and used its skin to patch their shoes.
May grew thinner, but her eyes remained bright. In the long, quiet hours, she spun fibers from dried grass, weaving them into cords and humming the same song she once sang in New Haven. It was the sound of courage disguised as comfort. As spring returned weekly to the valley, the grass began to grow between the stones. Daniel cleared a small patch for planting. He dug with a sharpened stick, turning the soil that smelled of salt and frost. He planted seeds they had carried since the fire, grains blackened by smoke, but still alive. When the first green shoots appeared, he knelt beside them and wept, because something in the world still wanted to live. The days were filled with labor, cutting sod, gathering driftwood, mending walls against the coming cold. At night, they sat together, their faces lit by the soft red of the fire. They spoke little, for words felt small in a land that demanded silence. But May sometimes told stories from her childhood, stories of warm summers and full tables. And Daniel listened, not because he remembered, but because her voice made him believe such days might come again. The valley slowly changed around them. Birds nested among the rocks, wild goats grazed on the slopes, and Daniel began to think that maybe the land had accepted them. May built a small pen for the goats they captured. She milked them and learned to make curds and butter. Each drop of milk was victory, each loaf of bread a celebration. But survival had its price. The winters returned sharper than before. Snow buried the valley for months. The wind howled through every crack, and food ran low. Daniel would leave before dawn, hunting across the ice, and return long after sunset, empty-handed more often than not. May kept the fire alive, burning dried moss and fish bones when the wood was gone. Her hands were burned and blackened, but she never complained. One night, Daniel came home bleeding from a deep cut, the work of his own knife dulled by use. May cleaned the wound with trembling hands and tore a piece of her shawl to bind it. Her eyes glistened, but she said nothing. Daniel touched her face and whispered that he was sorry for bringing her to this place of endless struggle. She shook her head. "No," she said softly. "You brought me to a place where I can still hope. That is enough." Through hardship, their bond deepened. They were no longer two lost souls, but two halves of a single will. When Daniel worked, May sang. When May wept, Daniel held her. Their silence became language. Their small joys became faith. By the third year, they had built more than a home. They had built a way of life. A barn for their goats, a garden ringed with stones, a small altar made of driftwood and bone where May prayed each morning. She did not pray to the God of the priests or the bell, but to the quiet that had carried them this far, to the strength that grew in hunger, and to the love that survived in ruin. Sometimes wanderers passed through the valley, thin men with hollow eyes, families fleeing famine or war. Daniel shared what little he had, and in return they told him stories of other lands, of frozen seas, of people building turf houses far to the north. In their words he saw his own reflection, and knew that his struggle was part of something larger, a human story repeated across the world, of people trying to live where life itself refused to stay. May's health began to fade after another cruel winter. Her cough deepened, her breath short and ragged. Daniel sat beside her night after night, feeding the fire and praying in silence. He had no doctor, no medicine, only his hands and his love. May smiled weakly and told him not to be afraid. "We were never meant to live forever," she said, "but we were meant to try. And that trying is what makes life holy." The last snow melted slowly that year, and Daniel carried her outside to see the first light of spring. They sat together on the hill above the river. The grass glistened with frost, and the sun rose pale and distant. May closed her eyes and whispered, "Listen. Can you hear it?" Daniel listened. There was no sound but the wind, and yet he knew what she meant. It was the sound of the world still turning, the sound of life refusing to stop. That night, she slept with her head on his chest, her breath shallow and uneven. Daniel stayed awake until the fire went out, holding her hand as if the warmth might keep her here. When dawn came, her fingers were cold, and the silence inside the house became endless. He buried her beneath the willow near the river and marked the grave with a stone. He did not carve her name, for names fade, but love does not. Then he stood for a long time, watching the river carry the morning light away. From that day forward, Daniel spoke little. He tended the goats alone, worked the fields alone, and slept beside the dying fire. But in his solitude, he began to understand something May had always known, that survival is not the same as living, and that every act of kindness, every moment of tenderness, is a form of prayer.
A grief is a strange companion. It sits beside you, unseen yet always present, until one morning you wake and realize that it has changed its shape. It no longer crushes you, it simply stays, like the chill of a long winter. One morning, Daniel rose before sunrise and went to the river with his hands full of seeds. He stood where May had once prayed and scattered them into the earth. It was not planting season, but he did it anyway. He whispered, "If you can hear me, I will keep trying." The act broke something inside him, and then mended it. For the first time since she had gone, he felt that she was not lost, only waiting somewhere beyond his sight. That spring was kind. The days were longer, the frost melted sooner, and the valley seemed softer. New grass grew across the hills, and birds returned to their nests. Daniel took it as a sign that life had accepted his offering. Soon after, travelers began to arrive again. Some were hunters from the northern hills, others were families searching for a place to settle. They came weary, hungry, and frightened. Daniel gave them food, offered shelter in the small barn, and showed them how to build turf walls. At first, they stayed only a few days, but word began to spread of a quiet man who lived in a green valley and shared what little he had. Within a year, more huts appeared along the river. Children's laughter returned to the air. Women hung clothes on lines between stones. Smoke rose from new chimneys. Daniel, who had once been alone, now found himself surrounded by life. He did not call himself a leader, he called himself a neighbor. He taught others how to plant and pour soil, how to catch fish beneath the ice, how to mend wounds with moss and ash. And in the evenings, when they gathered around the fire, he told them stories, not of kings or miracles, but of a woman named May, who believed that even sorrow could be beautiful if it was met with kindness. As seasons turned, the valley became a true village. They called it Willow's Rest, for the tree that shaded May's grave. And though Daniel never spoke of the pain that had birthed it, the people sensed it in his eyes, the deep calm of someone who had already walked through the fire and returned carrying light. Years passed like river water. Daniel's hair grew white, his hands rough and lined. He spent most of his days teaching the children. He showed them how to read the sky for weather, how to listen to the river's voice. He taught them to respect the land and never take more than they needed. To them, he was simply the old farmer by the willow, but some whispered that he was blessed. He never denied it, but he never claimed it either. He said only this: the land blesses those who love it back. One cold morning, a trader from the southern coast arrived. He carried strange goods, candles, mirrors, bits of silver, and news of distant towns. He told of new cities rising where New Haven once stood, of bells ringing again in rebuilt towers, of priests preaching peace after years of ruin. Daniel listened quietly. He had not heard the word bell spoken in many years. It stirred old memories, both beautiful and bitter. That night, he sat beside the fire alone. He thought of the bell that had once ruled their lives, how it had called them to prayer, to labor, to fear. And he thought of the silence that had followed, how out of that silence he and May had built something more lasting than any church. He smiled then, a slow, gentle smile. Perhaps the true bell, he thought, was not made of bronze or stone, but of human hearts that refused to give up. When spring returned once more, the valley bloomed brighter than ever. The fields were thick with grain, the river full of fish. Children played near the willow, their laughter carrying across the hills. Daniel took his afternoons sitting near the water, watching them run. Sometimes he would close his eyes and feel as if May were sitting beside him, her hand resting lightly on his. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He did not cry out. He simply leaned back against the willow and looked toward the fading sky. The clouds glowed gold and violet, and the wind carried the scent of earth after rain. He thought of everything he had built, the homes, the people, the kindness that had grown from sorrow. He whispered softly, "It is enough." When the villagers found him the next morning, he was still smiling. They buried him beside May, under the same willow that had sheltered their first home. The people stood in silence, heads bowed, and then one of the children began to hum. The tune Daniel had taught them long ago, the same one May used to sing by the fire. Others joined in, their voices blending with the wind. Years turned to decades. Willow's Rest grew into a town. New houses replaced the old turf huts.
A small church was built near the river, but instead of a bell, the people hung a simple wooden wind chime at its door. They said it was to remind them that silence can be sacred too. Travelers still come through the valley, and when they ask about the graves by the willow, the villagers tell them a story. They say there once lived a man and a woman who fled the fire, who faced hunger and cold, and who built a new life out of nothing but love and patience. They say their spirit still watches over the valley, carried by the wind that moves through the grass. And on still nights, if you stand near the river and listen carefully, you can almost hear it, the faint, gentle sound of two voices, whispering to each other in the dark, telling the world to keep trying, to keep living, no matter how cold the days may be. On the morning of September 25, 1066, Harold Hardrada's army rested on the green banks of the River Derwent, confident that England was theirs. Many of his men had left their armor behind on the ships after their victory at Fulford only days before. The morning air was calm. Then came the thunder of hoofbeats and the rising dust of an approaching host, Harold Godmanson's English army, fresh from its lightning march north. Harold Hardrada, caught off guard but unbroken, reacted with the instinct of a born warrior. He seized his helmet, drew his sword, and shouted for his men to form ranks. The river glittered under the late September sun as the Norsemen scrambled into position. The bridge itself became the choke point between the two armies, narrow, wooden, and destined to run red with blood. As the English forces surged forward, one lone Norse giant held the bridge. Armed with a massive two-handed axe, he single-handedly cut down wave after wave of attackers. The sagas say he slew 40 men before an English soldier, slipping under the planks in a barrel, thrust his spear through the gaps and brought him down. With the bridge cleared, the English crossed in force. On the field beyond, Harold Hardrada raised the blue banner known as Land Ravager, the symbol of his destiny. His warriors formed the shield wall, a living fortress of overlapping shields and spears. For hours the battle raged. Arrows whistled through the air, the clang of steel echoed across the valley, and the cries of men and horses filled the sky. Harold Hardrada fought in the front line, tall and terrible, his golden mail gleaming. Then, as he lifted his sword to rally his men, an English arrow struck him in the throat. The great king fell where he stood, his banner fluttering above him. His men fought on, desperate to recover his body, but their fate was sealed when the English king offered them mercy if they surrendered. Only a fraction of the Norse army survived to return home, barely 24 ships from the 300 that had crossed the sea. The Battle of Stamford Bridge ended not just Harold Hardrada's life, but the Viking Age itself. His dream of a northern empire died with him. Yet his courage, ambition, and relentless will ensured his place among the greatest warriors in history, the last and fiercest of the Viking kings. But the story did not end there. Even as Harold Godwinson stood victorious over the slain Norsemen, word reached him that another invasion had begun. William of Normandy had landed in the south. Exhausted yet determined, the English king turned his army once more, marching south to face a new threat. 3 weeks later, at Hastings, Harold Godwinson himself would fall, struck down by an arrow to the eye, just as Harold Hardrada had been. 2 kings, 2 arrows, and the passing of an age. The fall of Harold Hardrada marked the twilight of the Old World. The Viking spirit that had terrorized and transformed Europe for 3 centuries flickered out on that field beside the Derwent. From the ashes of that defeat, a new order arose, the Norman world, the age of castles and kings, of Latin learning and feudal rule. But in the sagas and songs of the North, Harold Hardrada lived on. They remembered him as the last great Viking, a man of unbreakable pride and boundless will, a king who had sailed from the fjords of Norway to the golden halls of Constantinople, from exile to empire, and who met his end as he had lived, standing beneath his banner, sword in hand, defying fate itself. When the echoes of battle faded from Stamford Bridge, silence rolled across the valley. The smoke lifted and the sun fell low, turning the fields to gold. There among the fallen, the wind moved gently through the grass, whispering over broken shields and still hands. The river that had run red now shimmered clear again, carrying away the last traces of the war that ended an age. The men who survived returned home slowly, their ships heavy not with treasure, but with sorrow. The sea was calm that autumn, as if the world itself mourned in quiet dignity. They carried tales of their king, Harold Hardrada, who had stood tall to the end and whose name would live longer than his body. In every fjord and valley, his story became a prayer, a warning, and a song. Children heard of the tall warrior who had sailed from Norway's cold cliffs to Constantinople's marble halls, who had fought in lands of gold and shadow, and who fell beneath the English sky. And though the years washed away the blood and bones, his name lingered like the taste of salt in the sea air. Back in Norway, widows lit candles and placed them in windows overlooking the fjord. Mothers told their sons that courage was not in victory, but in standing when the storm rose. And in quiet homes built of timber and smoke, people whispered that perhaps the gods themselves had called Harold home, for men of his kind were born to burn bright, not long. The world was changing. Ships no longer carried warriors, but merchants. The axe gave way to the plow, and the sword to the quill. The age of raids and iron was fading, birthing an age of kings, churches, and trade. But deep beneath the new world's polished surface, the old stories endured, faint, stubborn, unyielding. Historians would later call it progress, but for those who remembered the North, it was something else. A slow softening of the edges, a fading of the wild courage that once roared through every fjord. The Viking Age had ended not with defeat,
but with transformation. The sea that had carried warriors now carried ideas, art, and trade. The same restless spirit that once sought battle now sought knowledge and song. In time, the sons of those who buried Harald Hardrada built churches of stone on the hills above the fjords. They carved his name on bells and altars, not to glorify war, but to remember the heart that had once refused to yield. And when the bells rang across the valleys, their sound mingled with the wind, deep, solemn, eternal. The last of the old seers said that every age ends with silence, that after the clash of swords and the shouting of men, the world must rest. And in that rest, the truth reveals itself. For the Vikings, that truth was not conquest. It was the realization that all men, no matter how fierce, must finally return to the sea. The same sea that bore them into life and that takes them back when their time is done. Centuries later, travelers found the burial mound said to be Harald's. There was no treasure, no crown, only a weathered stone with faint carvings half-eaten by moss. Yet when the evening light touched it, the letters seemed to shimmer, and those who stood there swore they heard a sound, the distant toll of a bell that was never built, ringing softly from beneath the earth.
It was said that the bell was not of metal, but of memory, forged from the voices of all those who had lived, fought, and loved beneath the northern sky. And when the wind blew from the fjord, the sound carried over the mountains, gentle and haunting, as if reminding the world that courage never truly dies. The sea still washes against the rocks of Norway, patient and endless. Its waves tell stories to those who listen, of men who dreamed too greatly, of ships that vanished into mist, of hearts that burned, even when the world turned cold. Fishermen say that on certain nights, when the moon hangs low and the tide is high, you can see ghostly sails drifting along the horizon, glowing faintly like frost. They call it the Fleet of the Fallen, forever sailing toward dawn. And so the saga of the North closes, not in blood, but in peace. The battlefields have turned to meadows. The cries of war have become the songs of shepherds and the laughter of children. Where once stood the shield walls, now stand villages and chapels, humble yet enduring. The people of the North still wake to the same wind, the same cold stars, the same sea that once carried their ancestors to glory. The legacy of Harald Hardrada and of all who lived by the tide is not in conquest, but in resilience. It is in the courage to build when the world collapses, in the faith to love even when tomorrow is uncertain, and in the quiet understanding that history is not a straight path, but a tide, flowing forward, then back again, shaping everything it touches. Time, the greatest sea of all, has carried their names across 1,000 years, and though the world they knew has long vanished, its echo still lives in us, in every act of endurance, in every dream of freedom, in every soul that refuses to yield to darkness. For history is not just what was, it is what remains, in spirit, in song, in silence. And if you listen closely, somewhere beyond the sound of the wind, beyond the rolling of waves and the hum of the earth, you can still hear it, faint but steady, the heartbeat of the North. Thank you, dear listener, for walking with me through these quiet echoes of time. May the courage of the past remind us to face our own storms with grace. Until we meet again, may your nights be calm, your dreams kind, and your heart steady like the sea beneath the moon.